Welcome to The Disciplined Life. I'm Aria.
And I'm Coda.
We use our experience as a married couple living in a domestic discipline marriage to talk about the ups and downs of implementing authority structure and domestic discipline into modern relationships.
Let's do it. Hello, everyone.
On today's podcast, we are going to be talking through one of our most recent punishments and talking about the emotional aspect of going through punishment on our perspective sides of the relationship. But before we get started, if you are not already, please subscribe. We are really close to 1,000 subscribers, and it would be an amazing goal to hit. So please help us hit that goal by subscribing if you are not already. Leave this video a like, leave a comment. It really does help out the channel. And if you want to support the channel further, a link to our Patreon is down below. On Patreon, you get a post show to go along with these weekly podcasts, as well as bonus content throughout the month and access to our Discord server. But without further ado, let's get into the topic. This is part 2 of our discussion on this topic. So in this part, we are jumping right into the punishment process. We are more meticulous in how we kind of have set up our domestic discipline. I know going in kind of what the range of what to expect, right? So I know when you told me that it was going to be a hard punishment, I knew exactly why, because that had already been pre-negotiated. That was not something you sprung on me. And I kind of know what to somewhat expect out of that. Like a hard punishment, we'll just kind of briefly go through our process. We have a warm-up, and the warm-up is never, there's never any like standard length of that necessarily. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, what I try to do is make it to where I really try to gauge where she's at from the standpoint of I really try to say, okay, because sometimes it hasn't taken very long at all to warm up. Sometimes it has. So I try to just gauge what her behavior is and how she's feeling. I can tell when I say gauge her, I can tell if she's kind of adjusting as I get a little harder with, because we use the implement that we use for resets for the warm up, and then once the warm up is done, we go to a different implement. So
right. And also, I don't know if you did this intentionally, but this particular punishment was one of the harsher punishments that I have endured. And I don't know if you did this intentionally, but the warm-up was a lot longer.
I did do that intentionally because I felt like, just like with anything, and again, this goes back to me being a performer. If you're doing a long concert or something like that, you warm up longer. So it's the same thing. If you're doing a harder, longer punishment, you need to warm up more.
So after the warm-up, we move, like Coda just said, we move into a different implement. We have the paddle that we use for maintenance and for warm-ups, and then we have a over-the-knee paddle, and then we have a longer paddle that is used with me in a different position. And so after the warm-up, he moves into the over-the-knee paddle for punishment. It is slightly heftier than our maintenance paddle. It definitely has a very different sensation. And he also goes in with more intensity once the punishment has officially started. And so those are counted. The way we do punishments is we do sets of 10 swats with the paddle. And that way, it's easier to keep track on Coda's end. It's also, I know that if I'm having a really hard time maintaining position, or if I'm tempted to reach back, or if I'm tempted to break position, any of that, I can kind of just keep track of that set so that I know, okay, in I just 3 more swats and then I'm going to get a little bit of a break, it's easier for me to maintain position. It's easier for me to stay where I need to be and accept the punishment. Knowing that that's coming. So, it's a very rhythmic 10 swats, and then that gives you the opportunity, Coda, to pause and give those times of lecture in between.
And sometimes, I don't necessarily, although I used to, but I've gotten better, at every pause between each set, lecture. Because what I've learned is sometimes silence is good. Sometimes silence speaks a lot. And the other thing is that if I've lectured a couple times in a row, I want to give Aria a chance to process what I've just said. Because a question might be coming. So if she needs time to process in order to potentially answer the question that I'm about to ask. And so what I would say is any of you listening, if you're thinking about structuring your punishment in this way, really, and this is why I visualize before we start, why I take time to visualize and to think about what I'm going to say, because that is very, very important to the overall progression of the punishment. And so you if you're not prepared in what you're going to say and what you want to lecture about and want her to understand and to the questions and everything, it's going to make the punishment a little harder to go about and to get the result mentally. You're getting the physical result by the paddle, but you want the mental result by the lecture.
And that's a good point you just brought up, is that punishment is twofold. There is the physical aspect, but there's the psychological, emotional aspect of punishment as well. And to have a really effective punishment to really effectively change behavior, it's important to have elements of both. And so for this particular punishment, I believe you gave me 9 sets.
That is correct.
Okay. Because for a hard punishment, it's either 8, 9, or 10 sets of 10 for the over the knee portion. You can extend that if you feel it's necessary. We do also have what we call a severe punishment that would go beyond that, but you can always play around with these numbers if you feel it's necessary. But for this particular punishment, you gave me 9 sets. Your lecture during this particular punishment was really on point.
Thank you.
Would you agree?
Yeah, and what I tried to lecture her about was, again, regardless of what happens with me, that the expectations are still there. I'm going to try to always hold up my end, but even though I don't, that doesn't give you license to then disobey the rules.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, this was a week and a half ago, and I know that we try not to dwell. We try not to hold on to these emotions post-punishment. We really try to use punishments to work through everything so that we can process and get back to a good place and move forward. But correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, accepting this punishment, accepting your lecture, accepting your words, you came across as you came at me with a little bit more anger than you have before.
I didn't mean for it to come across that way, but I did want to come across very stern. I felt like the punishments that I needed to come across more stern because, in my opinion, correct me if you think I'm wrong, you need that in punishments to a certain extent. You don't need me to be mean. There's a difference between being mean and being stern. Stern, you can still be respectful to your partner, but you have to be very precise in getting the point across. And to a certain extent, maybe there is a little bit of emotion of anger in that, but the sternness is what I was going for, to realize the severity of what you had done, because that's important.
I think that that's fair because I think that stern is a good way to describe it because for me, I was reading it as anger, but it wasn't uncontrolled. You never came off as uncontrolled. You never came off as unhinged. You never came off as unfair. So stern probably is a better descriptor there. But that's the first time I've really felt that from you. And I know that part of that is because this is one of the first times that I have intentionally disobeyed you out of frustration and out of spite. And I think that you really wanted to correct that very swiftly and very effectively. And so you came at me with a little bit more of a stern, presence.
I always approach every punishment, and I'm getting better at it, I think, but I've always approached every punishment as if I want to try, even though this is not realistic, but I want to try to get across the severity enough that you hopefully will never do that again.
And it definitely was what I needed. It was more effective, and it helped me understand the weight and the gravity of my behavior. And I definitely think that it was warranted. And it really did make the punishment overall a lot more meaningful and a lot more effective. Anything else you want to talk about through that like first portion? Okay. So he just shook his head no. We are sharing a mic today if you are on the audio only. So typically he probably would have piped in with a no, but so after the over the knee portion of the punishment, you do let me know when it's the last set for a few reasons, if I'm not mistaken. Number one, so that I have an idea that, what to do after that set is over and what to expect because I know what the next step is. Also, you make the last set more intense in the intensity of the delivery. And so you kind of want me to a certain extent be mentally and a little bit physically prepared that this set is going to hurt a little bit more than the previous sets.
Yeah, I want you to be able to prepare yourself.
And so you let me know when the last set is, and then after that happens, you do give me time. You don't expect me just to jump up right away. But you give me a few seconds to get myself up, and this is where we use corner time. It is not a long corner time. It is quite short, actually. And in fact, do you time that at all?
I mean, I don't actually time it with a watch or anything, but I try to just say in my mind, like, I just kind of feel I use my own gauge on what I feel like is the right kind of timing.
Because I would say that for this punishment, in fact, you called me out of the corner, and I kind of I looked a little doe-eyed because I wasn't ready yet. And so I remember you called me out of the corner, and I kind of turned around and I looked. I can only imagine the facial expression I was giving you. I think deer in headlights is probably a fair descriptor.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so, and you told me, you're like, you can take another couple minutes, because it felt like you only left me in the corner all of 2 minutes.
Yeah, and then I usually try to say 2 or 3 minutes in my mind. I don't know if it may be less. It probably was less. But I just try to get everything prepared for the next phase of punishment, get my mind ready to do it. And then normally when I'm at that point, then that's when I try to say, okay, it's time. So in this particular punishment, I realized, okay, for me, it didn't take as long. Obviously for her, maybe it's taking a little longer. So that's why I said, no, you can stay in the corner for a minute.
And I would say, if we didn't talk about this, but if there was anything that I would say is For the more physically intense punishments, corner time in between not only gives you a chance to prepare yourself and also prepare the space, but it gives me a chance to kind of have a little bit of a break from the physical aspect of it, of receiving punishment. And I just, for those more physically intense punishments like this one, I need just a few more minutes, where other punishments where it's not as physically taxing, a minute or two is fine.
Yeah, and so I try to give you that time, and so then we can move on to the final part of punishment.
And I think it's important also to note, like, I didn't necessarily have the words or feel empowered to communicate in that moment, because during punishment, I really try to allow myself to be directed. I try not to assert any type of opinion into the process, because this is really your time to direct me and to, like, your job is always to direct me, like that. I don't know how I'm trying to say it, but I really try not to bring any type of negotiation or conversation or discussion into punishment. And so I didn't have the words, but you were attuned enough to me to see that I was feeling kind of overwhelmed by the prospect of starting the next phase of punishment when you told me to come out of the corner and you gave me that extra time. And it's important to note, like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to need a few extra minutes. It's okay to ask for a few extra minutes. I think as a taken in hand, I need to remind myself that I'm always allowed to ask. And my question doesn't mean that I am dictating the answer. And as long as I'm open to accepting whatever answer I'm given, it's okay to ask. It's okay to say, can I have a minute?
Yeah, I would agree.
And so I took another minute in the corner, and I didn't wait. And I guess this was okay because you didn't tell me otherwise. But because I asked for that extra time, I took the time I needed, which was probably another like 45 seconds. And then I brought myself out of the corner. Were you okay with that?
Yeah, because that's what I was waiting on. When you were ready, you would be ready to receive it. If you took too long, I was going to say, okay, that's enough. But I was gauging it on, and you didn't take too much longer. But if you had taken, another minute to a minute and a half, I would have said, okay, that's enough.
Once I came out of the corner, then this is kind of the final phase of our punishment process. Unless it's a severe punishment, then we have a third phase. But for this punishment, it was the final phase. I bend over the back of our piece of furniture that we have out here in the studio. It's like a chaise lounge. And so I bend over the back of that, and you switch to the longer paddle that we have. And again, completely different sensation. These are all acrylic paddles. They're all made by the same maker. And in fact, the over the knee paddle and the longer paddle that we have are two variations of the same design. They have completely different sensations. And so I bent over, got into position. Did you lecture me at all? Do you lecture me before you start, or do you wait?
I always lecture before I start, and then again, I've already visualized when I'm going to lecture throughout these sets. And this is the time where I'm going to ask more questions than lecture, because since it's the last set of punishment, the sets of punishment, I want you to start really drawing the conclusions together. I want you to start drawing what you can do differently next time. So this is a time where I ask a lot more questions, and I'm a little bit more matter of fact of saying, Now, here's what I want you to learn from this. Do not let this happen again. And I speak like that. But I also do try not to talk very much. I just want to be very precise and to the point to get through this last part. Not to rush through it. When I say to get through it, not to rush through it, but to be very matter of fact of let's finish it. Let's put the exclamation point on it and get to this final part. Let's finish it up.
And I think that asking questions is so important because that really is so impactful for me. I remember during this particular punishment, since we've kind of laid everything else out there, why not this? You asked me, why do you disobey me when you're upset with me? And that question absolutely crushed me because it made me face the fact that I am holding my respect towards you to be conditional, and I am weaponizing my submission to you to withhold it when I don't feel like you deserve it. And that was a mindset that I needed to have corrected. And so I used that punishment process to say, and that is actually when I came to the conclusion that this isn't about bedtime. This punishment was not about my bedtime. It was about the fact that I withheld my submission as a way to weaponize my obedience because I was upset. I allowed my upset feelings to affect my behavior in a way that degraded my relationship.
One thing I have learned, even in my own behavior in life, is that when anything happens, bad, sometimes good, it was all motivated by something. And so one of the things that I've realized about any of these rules, and that's why I wanted you to ask you that, and that's one reason that came out when I was doing my time of reflection before you came out. It was like, she didn't just break the rule to break the rule. There's a motivation behind that, and so I wanted you to face what that was. Because even in my own life, when I screw up and I do something, there's a motivation that maybe even be subconscious that I need to get in touch with and make it conscious so that I can correct the behavior.
Yeah. And so starting the second phase of punishment, you always make sure that first couple swats with that paddle land very precisely. Because initially, those first few swats, they don't really necessarily hurt when they're delivered, but then it has this growing sensation of just residual burning pain that just kind of spreads. And then I would say by the fifth swat with that paddle, I'm like, how am I going to make it through the rest of this punishment? Because this is hard to take. But you don't let that affect how you conduct the rest of the punishment at all.
In fact, that's why I lecture less, because I think the pain is a lecture in itself.
I listened to a YouTuber that does Reddit reactions, and one of his phrases that he uses a lot is pain creates change, and that is definitely something that can be said for the punishment process, is that there has to be a level of almost unbearable pain in order to create meaningful change. And that will look different for everyone. There's some couples that they lean heavier into the emotional side through lecturing so that they don't have to use the physical pain of punishment quite as intensely. And then there's couples that do the opposite. I think we land a little bit more in the middle for that balance. I think that we balance out the emotional and the physical aspect of punishment. And so I tried to count, just for my own curiosity this time, but I lost count during that time because it's really, really hard. You don't require me to count.
I do not. I do the counting.
Some couples, they do require the person receiving the spanking to keep count or even to count out loud. That's not something that we do. That's not something that we find beneficial in our process. But how many did you give me in that final phase? If I'm guessing correctly, 60?
That is the correct number.
Okay. So I guess I kept a little bit better track than I thought. And so, and again, we do it in sets of 10, but those swats are given because they're given at a very high intensity. The sensation of the paddle is a lot harder to take. They are given with more swing because I'm bent over and you're standing behind me. You give me a few seconds in between each swat to kind of react. I'm not expected to hold perfect position. I try, but if I squirm or I move or I, kick up or whatever, but I am expected to react and get back into position quickly. Like, you would not stand for me to take a full 30 seconds between.
No.
You give me about 10 seconds to react and reposition?
About five or six.
Okay. It's not long. But then after 10, you pause. Sometimes you lecture, sometimes you don't. But like you were saying, it's a quick reiteration. And I felt like during this punishment, I feel like you try to do this throughout. That first phase when I'm over your knee is when you are giving me more direction. You are giving me more, and you're coming at me with a little bit more stern and stoic presence. That's when I kind of felt a little bit more of that like anger towards my behavior coming towards me. And it was almost like, and I don't know if you would use this phrase, but it was almost like you had the audacity to, like, that was kind of the energy you were bringing. Like, you had the audacity to disobey me because you were upset. How dare you?
Good. I'm glad that's what I wanted to get across.
So that's kind of what I felt in that first phase. And then the second phase is really more of laying expectations, and it's almost like I feel a little bit more of like you're building into reconciliation.
Yes.
So it's like it's less anger, it's more directive, and it's almost like I feel reconciled a little bit throughout that process, and I feel like the punishment is concluding, and I feel that rebuilding throughout that. So by the time the punishment is actually over, I'm primed to accept your forgiveness and to truly move on.
Good. That's what I try to strive for every punishment.
And so that is kind of the emotional process that I go through. Do you have anything to add towards that second phase, that final phase?
Nope. I just try to make sure that it's the same thing, that as I'm going through the process, I'm processing all my emotions. So by the time we get to the end of the punishment, that I can also give forgiveness, and that I'm in a emotion of a new emotion of again, forgiveness, letting go, and embracing compassion, empathy, all of those things.
And then afterwards, after the final SWAT, now do you tell me when it's the last set of those?
Yes, I do.
Because you do kind of give those at a higher intensity. Like, we try to use like a 1 to 10 scale when we're describing intensity, and I would say that final phase of punishment is given at a 9, except for the last set that's given at a 10.
Yes.
Yeah, you kind of want that exclamation point on the process and to kind of end with like um a finale, so to speak. And so after that final SWAT is given, then you tell me to, you put the paddle down, and I think you kind of like touch me, right? You give me a few seconds to kind of accept the physical sensation of what I've just gone through, and then
I just try to say, hey, all is forgiven, all is made right, and the slate is wiped clean. And then I try to remind you, once we leave the room, leave it behind and start over. Our relationship is mended. Everything is again made right. We're starting fresh. Don't lament over it any longer. Don't take it with you. The punishment has done what it's supposed to do.
and I will apologize, and you will hold me. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I don't. I don't think I really cried during this punishment. Um, and that's okay. Like, tears are not a uh, qualifier to a successful punishment. You just do what you need to do. But what is a qualifier is that the next night I did come to bed 5 minutes early. So it definitely had its intended effect. And I don't feel like either one of us held on to those emotions after.
No, I don't think so.
So I think that's it. We kind of talked through that. I just felt like this was a good conversation to have and kind of a good topic to talk through. I really enjoyed kind of hearing Coda's side of it, because I don't think that we've ever really sat down and talked about our perspective processes through this.
No, I think this is the first time we've done that.
So again, our link to our Patreon is down below if you want to get the podcast in video form. Give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already. We'll see you next time.